Well, good morning, friends. So good to see you today. We are celebrating this message series as we continue about what it means to be united. What does it mean to be a unified body? God has called us to be united as believers. In fact, Jesus prayed for us that we would be one even as the Father and the Son are one. And that's a mighty high standard, don't you think? Jesus set the bar high for us because unity is so important. So we're studying a little bit about that in this series. And this morning we're talking about kind of the ultimate enemy of unity, which is when we say, I quit. I'm done. I've had enough. And we've all been there at points, have we not? I always talk through sermons with some friends of mine, and when I was sent this message to them this week, they looked at the title, and the first thing they said is, do we need to have another conversation here? Is this a little bit deeper? And I said, no, this is not a confessional. I'm not quitting. I said, this is a feeling that we all have from time to time, right? We all feel at times like we need to throw in the towel, like we've just done everything we can and we've had it. And granted, there are times in life where it's justifiable to step away from something. There's times in life we need to have transition. But oftentimes we say these words, I quit, prematurely. They are emotional kind of things that stir up inside of us where we get really upset over something and we just say, I've had it, and I'm not thinking about this logically, I just quit, I'm done. And remember, we talked about feelings, that feelings always matter because they're your feelings. They're valuable. They're important. However, your feelings are often wrong because they're feelings, right? They're based on seasons and this and that and the other, all these things that kind of can influence them. And so oftentimes we make these decisions about quitting way too early. Sometimes we do it because we idealize the past. Anybody remember the good old days, right? Maybe that was like 10 years ago for you. Maybe it was like 30 years ago. I don't know. Depends who you are. You know, I'm 34. So if I talk about the good old days, people start groaning like, you don't know good old days, right? But regardless, I had one of those moments this past week when I was listening to the radio and they were talking about this new invention, this vending machine. It's in Chicago. We've got an image of it here. This is the Farmer's Fridge vending machine. This is real, not made up. And in this vending machine, you can actually buy fresh tofu and kale, other products. Items start at $8 a piece. And for me, this was a real bummer because I think vending machines should be like fun, right? Like you get candy bars, M&Ms, this kind of stuff. Not like feel like, oh, I need to go eat tofu, right? Because it's at the vending machine. Remember the good old days when we didn't have to feel guilty about these sugary snacks and all that stuff, right? And I'm not opposed to health food, don't get me wrong, but, you know, something about this, like here, we've got this other image. Here's an older ad, right? You've got this mom, and she loves her baby, right? She's enjoying a Coke, right? And think, what's so bad about that, right? I mean, it's not evil. I mean, maybe it's not the most healthy thing in the world. What about those good old days when we could just enjoy our, unhealthy snacks without all this guilt, right? But then if we put the rest of this ad up here, you won't be able to read this, but it says, for a better start in life, start cola earlier. It's not for the mom, it's for the baby, right? And let me read those little tiny words for you. How soon is too soon? Not soon enough. Literally quoting here. Lab tests have proven that babies who start drinking soda in the early formative period have a much higher chance of gaining acceptance and fitting in during those awkward preteen years. I couldn't make this up if I wanted to. So do yourself a favor, do your child a favor. Start them on a strict regimen of sodas and other sugary carbonated beverages right now to guarantee a lifetime of happiness. I wish Saturday Night Live had seen this, right? They wouldn't even have to write any jokes. It's all right there. This is put out, by the way, by the Soda Pop Board of America. They were a little biased, apparently. But so we look at those good old days of not being pestered by all the health food people, but then we remember that in truth, we told people to give soda to babies because it'll make them less awkward as teenagers. Now, I don't get where, I would love to meet those laboratory scientists, right? I mean, you have got to be kidding me. That's just insane. The good old days are oftentimes not as good as we once thought. Or another one here. Here's another old ad. This is for Kellogg's Pep cereal, okay? Pep cereal, apparently. Anybody remember Pep? All right, a couple of you do. That's impressive. I don't know. It was probably outdone by like Frosted Flakes or something, right? But Pep You look at this and you say, isn't that great? Remember that era where men looked at women that way? He loves her, he cares about her, arms wrapped around her, he just adores her and admires her, right? Remember when men treated women like that? Now we see these ads and all they do is objectify women, right? Remember the good old days when things were like that? Well, in a second, I'm going to put the rest of this ad up for you. But before we do that, I need to warn you guys that the next image is going to cause some of you to fall into temptation, okay? And I want you to avoid that temptation. The temptation, it's a dangerous one for you because you may be tempted to agree or cheer or other things. It will not pan out well, okay? The harder a wife works, yeah, the cuter. I quit, I'm telling you. I tried, I really did. But no, we look at that. The harder a wife works, the cuter she looks. We say, that is offensive, right? I mean, the good old days here, the good old days, remember the older TV shows. We say, remember the good old days of how men used to treat women? They used to open doors for them, right? And they used to, such chivalry and manners, and now these guys, they don't care about all that stuff. They're kind of jerks, right? But then if we look back at the good old days and remember, that guy might have held the door for you, yes, but he also didn't want you to vote, right? And the thing is, I've only surveyed so many women, but I have not heard any who said, I could care less about voting and having an equal standing in society, but I'm getting about sick of opening all these doors, right? It's ridiculous. I want to go back to the good old days where I didn't have to open all these doors. I'm tired of it, right? Probably not. The good old days are not always as good as how we remember them. And if you're taking notes, you'll see that as humans, we oftentimes look at the past through rose-colored glasses. It's our nature. It's our tendency. We remember the past better than it was because in our minds, we look back to all the happy memories of that. And not all of that is bad, okay? It's all right that we can filter out some of that and have happy memories of the past and all that. But the challenge is that oftentimes when we look at the past and contrast it with the present, we're not really being fair because we're contrasting a false view of the past, all the beautiful, nice things of the past, with the ugly view of the present, which is all the pains and stresses and irritations. And that's what we focus on in the present. And if we live like this, we find that we're just never happy. We're just never happy because we're always wanting something that didn't even exist in the format that we remember it to exist in. And we get tempted, instead of moving forward, as we sang about, to always wish we could be moving backwards. But backwards, it's not possible in life. You can't roll back the clock. And oftentimes our view of the past isn't even accurate to what it once was. And so consequently, we make mistakes and we keep trying to do things to take us back to what was once great. A buddy of mine in college, he dated this girl for a while, and they had what seemed to be a pretty good relationship. But in time, they ran into some bumps and found out they're just not going to be compatible for each other. But for both of them, they struggled to move on from that. So they broke up, and they got back together, and they broke up, and they got back together time after time. I think it was about 5 times. I remember the 5th time he came into our dorm room, and he said, I'm back together with her. And I looked at him, and I didn't even say anything. And he goes, I know. It's like he had given up before it even began, right? But he was still looking back at that idealism of what they once had and not being willing to accept. It's time to move forward. It's time to move forward. We're going to look this morning at the book of Numbers, chapter 11, where God's people, the children of Israel, they're on this journey. They've left Egypt. God's rescued them from slavery, saved them from 400 plus years of being enslaved, and he's moved them out of Egypt and towards the promised land. But if you remember, they disobeyed on the way. They messed things up. And so they had to take a long, roughly 40-year detour through the wilderness. So the people of Israel, they're wandering through the wilderness, and from time to time, they get tired. They get frustrated. They get fed up with what's happening. Numbers chapter 11, verse 4 says this. Then the foreign rabble who were traveling with the Israelites began to crave the good things of Egypt, and the people of Israel also began to complain. Okay? foreign rabble. That's kind of like an author's commentary. He obviously doesn't like these people. What happened was when the Israelites left Egypt, we think that some others left with them who were not Israelites. Also, naturally, as they traveled, they probably picked up some other people along the way. So these people who were not Israelites, who were traveling with the Israelites, they began to get irritated. Over what? Food. Anybody else get irritated over food? I do sometimes, right? We like food to be good. We don't like to be hungry. We like to eat what we want to eat, when we want to eat it, how we want to eat it. And the Israelites were kind of feeling this, or this foreign rabble were kind of feeling this. They were unhappy with the current food situation, which we'll discuss in just a minute. And so they began to complain. And if there's one thing as human beings that we're good at, it's complaining, right? Did anybody who's got kids, did any of you have to teach your kids how to complain? We didn't. Let me tell you, they're outstanding at it by default. I love my kids, but they are great at, no matter what it is, they can find a way to complain about it, right? People, we have that from our earliest days. We can easily fall into complaining, no matter what the situation, no matter how good the situation. It's easier for us to default into that. Remember, I got to serve a church in the past where my first month there, I was intrigued on Sunday mornings by something because the building had a special smell on Sunday mornings. It would smell like fresh baked cinnamon rolls, right? So I'd come in there and like, I don't get where we are getting this like air freshener from or whatever, but it smells so good, it's making me hungry, right? And after about 4 weeks one day, I was kind of wandering through the building. It was a large building, and I finally found it. But it wasn't air fresheners, it was cinnamon rolls. I had been missing out all this time, right? They had this room where people who were like insiders, they knew about this, and they would take their kids back there, and there was nice tables set up and all this stuff, and they'd feed their kids cinnamon rolls, and they'd eat it. It was like a little social hour kind of thing, which was a great idea. But for those who were guests or not too familiar with the facility, it was really not very easy to find, just the way it was set up. So it was kind of this bait and switch, right? You smell cinnamon rolls, but you never can eat cinnamon rolls, right? So we made a decision that we were going to move those from this kind of back hidden room out to the lobby, right? It was a very logical decision. It made it so our guests could enjoy the cinnamon rolls too, kind of like what we've got out here, so you'd have some nice food there. It improved things in many ways, but there was no longer tables where parents could just leave their kids and let them eat and go about doing their, adult talking, conversation kind of stuff. Now you kind of had to watch your kids because they're in the lobby and, it requires like parental supervision and all that stuff we hate to do as parents, right? So we had some parents who got upset about this, right? Because they missed the good old days of being able to sit their kid at the table and leave them and go on. And they began to complain. And complain, and complain. And we talked to them. One of them came up to me and he said, I'm so upset about this because what am I supposed to do on Sunday morning? How am I supposed to feed my kids? Now, this was not a guy, this was not a guy who was lacking in financial resources. It was not a justice issue. It was a convenience issue. I said, well, I would try feeding him the same way you do the other 6 days of the week, right? That didn't help him much, though. Yes. But regardless, it was the location of free food that was given to them, right? And it was almost kind of comical. It's easy for us to laugh as outsiders, but to some people there, they would not have laughed about that. The rest of my time there, I couldn't make any cinnamon roll jokes, right? Because people would get mad about it, right? So that was like an off-limits topic. And we do that as people. We do. Sometimes we get upset over the silliest, littlest stuff that folks from the outside would say, seriously, you're mad because of that? But we do, because we're people. It kind of comes by default. And that's kind of what the Israelites did in this situation. So in Numbers 11, verse 5, they continue. "Oh, for some meat," they exclaimed. "We remember all the fish we used to eat for free in Egypt. We had all the cucumbers, melons, leeks, onions, and garlic that we wanted. But now our appetites are gone, and day after day we have nothing to eat but this manna." Okay, let me explain what's happening here. First of all, they long for the good old days in Egypt. Remember when we were in Egypt and we had all this great food? In fact, ironically, they said all the fish we used to eat for free in Egypt. Now, not to be a fact checker here, But if you recall, they were slaves in Egypt, right? So free means, yes, you get free food, you just owe them your entire life and your family, which seems less than free to me. I don't know, maybe that's just me. But clearly they were looking with some rose-colored glasses at slavery. They forgot already what this is like. Why? Because they didn't like the choice of food. And granted, they had some reason to be upset. This manna business, they're in the wilderness. There's not adequate food for them. So how are God's people going to survive? Well, God miraculously provided food for them. This manna, this bread that fell down from heaven, came every night with the dew. It appeared the next morning, and the Israelites were to go out, and they were to collect enough manna for their family for that day. No more, no less. And they would collect it, they would eat it. And this is what they ate. Now, it was a way of helping them remember that they were fully reliant on God. God was personally, miraculously feeding them each and every day. Jesus taught us to pray, and he said, give us this day our daily bread, right? That's what he was referencing. The people knew literally what this was like because they had to rely on God for their physical daily bread. God provided it each and every day. He said that he himself was the bread who came down from heaven. He used manna as an illustration to help talk about who he himself was. So Jesus knew about this, and he referenced this. And the people got tired of manna, though. I mean, I would. You probably would, right? The same food day in, day out. It would get old after a while. I mean, imagine the Israelite cooking TV shows, right? Get a little old, right? Well, we got another recipe for manna here. Today I don't know what we're going to do with it, right? And so that was kind of where they were at. And so the people got tired, and they got frustrated with it. And even though that they had been miraculously rescued from Egypt, miraculously brought through the Red Sea, miraculously fed every day, and they didn't have to do anything, they began to complain about it. And you see what had happened here, we have a progression, that the foreign rabble began to complain, right? The people who were not that committed to the community. And the foreign rabble's complaining spread to the others, who said, yeah, that's right. I'm getting sick of this manna. You know, that guy over there, he's got a good point. Are you sick of this manna? Oh, yeah, I'm sick of this manna too. This stuff tastes bad. Remember when we were in Egypt, it was free? Yeah, it was free. That was awesome. Why can't we go back there? And nobody said, well, because we were slaves and that stunk, right? So maybe that's a bad plan. Because we do this kind of stuff. When we get kind of caught in this loop of complaining, we forget to kind of self-critique and say, well, actually, you know, I hear what you're saying, I understand the frustration, but I'm not sure that's really how it was, or I'm not sure this is really as big of a deal as you're making it. Because by nature, we're not likely to confront one another. It's easier to agree and just say, yeah, I know what you're saying. And so then we start saying, well, everybody feels this way, right? I've talked to lots of people. They're all sick of the manna, and they want to go back to Egypt. Moses, why don't we go back to Egypt? And so that was exactly what the people wanted to do. And we remember here in our notes that when we're in the midst of change, we oftentimes idealize the past and forget its problems. We tend to idealize the past and to forget its problems. And that's just what they did. Numbers chapter 11, verse 10. Moses heard all the families standing in front of their tents, weeping, and the Lord became extremely angry. Moses was also aggravated. And Moses said to the Lord, why are you treating me, your servant, so miserably? What did I do to deserve a burden of a people like this? You understand Moses' frustration, right? And you see what's happened. The complaints started at the foreign rabble. They moved into the general Israelite body. And now the frustration has moved up to even their leader. Even to Moses is getting frustrated and says to God, what did I do? Why am I the one who has to do this? In fact, his complaining continues. This is almost funny. Are they my children? Am I their father? Is that why you have told me to carry them in my arms like a nurse carries a baby to the land you swore to give to their ancestors? Why am I on this 40-year-long babysitting job? I'm sick of it. These people they're jumping on my last nerve here. I can't stand this. I'm tired of the complaining. I want water. I want manna. I want Egypt back. I'm sick of it. Why is it, God, that you chose me to do this? Moses himself becomes frustrated. And he says this, Where am I supposed to get meat for all these people? They keep complaining, saying, give us meat. I can't carry all these people by myself. The load is far too heavy. I'd rather you killed me than treat me like this. Please spare me this misery. The complaining begins with the foreign rabble. It spreads up through the Israelite body, and now Moses wants to die. And what was the precipitating issue? We don't like the food. We've gotten a little off track here, haven't we? And it's so easy for us as a people to do that. It's so easy to let concerns and complaints, maybe there's validity to them. Truly there was. But it's so easy to blow those things out of proportion and want to say, I quit. Moses is saying, I want to quit life here. This is so miserable. I want to be done living, God, because I don't like my calling. I don't like my job. I don't like these people. I don't like the situation that you've put me in. And maybe you've been there before. Maybe you've experienced this discouragement in your life from others around you who are complaining or negative or always have something that they're upset about. It wears on us as people. And unfortunately, it can get in the way of us following God's guidance and following God's will. Just like with Moses here, he's getting way off track, really because of this negativity or because of this gossip that was spreading throughout the camp, right? We're going to talk negatively about what God's doing. He's providing this manna. We're unhappy with it, so we're going to talk negatively about it. It's going to spread throughout the camp, and we're going to have this big revolution and turn around and go back to Egypt. In your notes, you'll see that gossip is the ultimate enemy of unity. It is. Gossip is something that the Bible calls sin. It's very direct about it. The Bible's not at all in favor about it. And as Christians, this is one of those things that we struggle with because we're good at pointing out certain sins. We're good at condemning the people who lie and the people who steal, the people who do those big bad things, the people who cheer for the University of Michigan, right? All these kind of things. I know. But we're good at confronting all of these things, but we have a few that we just like to kind of overlook. They're kind of like B-level sins, right? And we put gossip in that category. Oh, it's not such a big deal. It's just venting, right? It's just being a little frustrated. And maybe there's some good points. But the Bible has a different way of looking at it. Proverbs 26:21. When you run out of wood, the fire goes out. When the gossip ends, a quarrel dies down. A quarrelsome person in a dispute is like kerosene thrown on a fire. Listening to gossip is like eating cheap candy. Do you want junk like that in your belly? That's the message. I love that translation. Say that, gossip, it's like cheap candy. It may taste good up front. It may seem like a good idea. But if you eat a meal of candy, you're going to pay later, right? You're not going to feel good. Your stomach is going to be sick. You're going to be lethargic. It's not going to be all right for you long term. And when we eat a diet of gossip, well, that's what we get in our lives. We get dissatisfied. We get angry. We get upset over little things that shouldn't really become big things. We get to the place that the people of Israel were at. Socrates said, strong minds discuss ideas. Average minds discuss events. Weak minds discuss people. Very true, is it not? Gossip is something that is the lowest form of our communication. And unfortunately, it's a form that we easily default to because, well, it's easy. It's a lot more difficult to say, okay, my cinnamon roll story, right? Okay, I may not like the change this has brought to my family, but really, let's think about the idea. The idea would be that we should be more welcoming to our guests. And that was kind of the original idea with these rolls anyway. So maybe moving them out there, maybe my having to be a little more responsible is going to be okay because the idea makes sense. The idea was not here that we should do something evil or morally wrong. The idea was something that we should do to be a little bit more friendly to guests. That's a much stronger level of conversation. Average minds discuss events, right? I'm irritated because I have to take care of my kids. This event of moving the cinnamon rolls, that makes me mad. And weak minds discuss people, right? I hate that Jon because he moved my cinnamon rolls, and I would just like to burn his house down now because I can't stand the fact I have to watch my kids on Sunday morning, right? And we go to these places because we just get upset. And it happens to all of us. It really does, because it's part of this human experience. But God calls us to something so much more than that. In your notes, you'll see that God's plan for your life does not have a reverse gear. We're moving forward. God calls us to be a people who are moving forward. Not a back to Egypt kind of people, but a moving forward kind of people. God is not calling you to look back to the good old days and say, how can I somehow get back to those ideals that I once remembered? Instead, we remember those things with great joy and celebration. Say, praise God for those days. Praise God for what God did in our life during those days. Let's remember them, let's celebrate them, but let's move forward. Because the truth is, we can't turn back the clock. We can only move forward into what God is calling us to do. And in those good old days, if we were spending the time looking back at the former good old days, we would never have made the memories we did back then. Because we would have been so busy looking backwards, we wouldn't have been living in the present and creating what God was calling us to do. Philippians chapter 4, verse 13 says this, "Whatever I have, whatever I am, I can make it through anything in the one who makes me who I am." Another translation says, "I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me." You don't need to be hindered or held down by the past. You don't, whether it's a past you remember with great memories or a past you remember with a great deal of pain. You don't need to be hindered or held back by that. God is calling us to move forward. And sometimes that is scary. Sometimes that is hard. Sometimes that leads us to step into areas that we're not sure that we want to step into. But friends, it's what God calls us to do. You know, there are studies on folks who are incarcerated, and they're incarcerated for years or sometimes decades of their lives. And then oftentimes when they get out, they have a tendency to repeat an offense, right? To do something again. We say, good grief, didn't you learn your lesson the first time? I mean, you spent all those years in jail or in prison, and why would you want to go back there? Why would you want to lose your freedom again? And what we find is that for many of them, it's where they're comfortable, because they got used to life there. And even though it makes no sense to us who enjoy our freedom, it's actually more comfortable to commit some crime and go back to incarceration. My hometown where I grew up, we had this guy. He was kind of a guy that everybody in town knew who he was. He was a homeless man. He was very funny. You could go talk to him there downtown, and he was always making jokes and always doing whatever. But the thing about him was he was not comfortable living in normal life. And Willie would, when he'd get out of jail, he would be out for a little bit, but then he would go commit some other petty crime. Remember one time they were building a new police station, and he got magic markers, and he went and drew all over the police station and wrote his name and drew self-portraits because it would get him put back in jail. And he was more happy in jail than in real life. Friends, don't be more happy in the prison of stuff in the past than you can be in the present. Even if the past was great, don't be imprisoned by that stuff. Don't let that stuff stop you from moving forward. There was a man named Harland. He dropped out of school when he was in the 6th grade because life was hard for his family, and he had to work to support his brothers. He wasn't lazy. He had to work hard, and he had to earn money, so he dropped out of school. For the next 50 years, Harland would try all different sorts of business ideas, and he would fail time after time after time. In his biography, he writes and details some of these things that he attempted to do. He was a farmhand. He was an army mule tender. He was a motel operator, an aspiring lawyer, a failed political candidate, and, as he says, an amateur OBGYN. I'm just going to move on from that one. By age 40, he had failed many times, and he was running a dinky service station, a little service station, trying to make ends meet and not succeeding real well. So he began to serve some food out of his service station, which was a little uncommon at that time. He began to serve some food as a way to make some extra money on the side. And his home, actually he rented out part of that service station to live in, and so the food selling went so well that he actually had to feed people out of his living room because he was running out of space. So finally he was doing something that worked, and then tragedy struck. The interstate system was being developed, and the highway that went by his service station was diverted in a different direction, and his prime piece of real estate suddenly was worth very little, and his huge clientele suddenly drove the other direction, and they forgot about him. Once again, he failed. He went bankrupt, in fact. He couldn't afford to keep his service station. He was 65 by this time, and he collected his first Social Security check. Now, here's a man who has failed over and over and over in the past and could very justifiably say, I quit. I've tried so many things in life. I'm going to live off of this little check for the rest of my life and just realize that my life has not been that successful. But Harland was not willing to do that. In fact, he was so courageous, he was so confident in his ability to cook food that Harland Sanders took that check and he invested it in a little restaurant. 65 years old. And I'd say it worked out okay, don't you think? That's a good amen, by the way. Over the next 10 years, over 600 KFC restaurants would be opened by Harland. In his mid-70s, he would sell his stake in the company for millions of dollars. Here's a man who failed time over time over time. And as we read his story and stories like this, we remember we can't be living in the past. I don't care how messed up your past is. I don't care how many times you've failed, how many people that you've let down, how many disappointments that you've had. God is calling you to move forward. Don't quit. Don't quit. You don't know what the next thing is that God has on the horizon for you. You don't know what God's next plan is, but what we do know is that if we don't do anything, if we don't take action, if we don't have courage to move forward, we will not live into what God is calling us to do, because God's not going to force you into it. He's not going to shove you into it. You've got to decide whether you have the courage to move forward. Philippians 4:13, whatever I have, whatever I am, I can make it through anything in the one who makes me who I am. It's true for individuals. It's true for us as a body as well. Don't quit. Don't give up on the great things that God has for this church. It's just such a privilege for me to get to be your pastor and be part of this body, to be a part of the great ministries that God is doing through Stillwater, to be able to be a part of a church with such a rich history and a strong present, and I think an even more exciting future. I can't wait to see what God will do through us. I believe in us. I believe in the power of God working through us. I believe very strongly that our greatest days, by God's grace, are in front of us. And I am so thankful for the chance to be continually moving forward with you as God changes us, as God moves us, as God brings about great ministry through us. A few ways you can live this out this week, or two ways. First, what's an area of your life where you're tempted to quit and you need to get back in the game? Maybe you need to write this down even. Is there an area of your life where you're saying, you know what, I have just about had it. I am tired, I am worn, I have put so much into this marriage and it's not going anywhere, or I've put so much into this job or this dream or this whatever it is, and you're tempted to quit. Don't quit. Don't give up. Write it down and find a way to get back in the game this week. What's one step that you can take to get back in the game? And second, who's a person who you know who's quit something who would benefit from your encouragement this week? You know somebody? You know somebody who's gotten discouraged in something and they've quit, and maybe they need you. Maybe they need you to give them a call or send them an email or take them out for coffee and encourage them to get back in the game. Because we all have those moments like the Israelites where we just want to quit, and we need the help and the inspiration of others. Would you pray with me? God, may we be a courageous people who never quits, who never gives up on your future for us. Lord, sometimes it is so hard to see and to understand. Sometimes our vision gets cloudy. Sometimes we get distracted by gossip or negativity. Sometimes we get pulled down by challenges that seem insurmountable. God, would you give us the courage to face those things? Would you give us the backbone that we need as individuals and as a body to move forward? Would you help us to follow you more and more faithfully today than we did yesterday? Would you help us to live more and more into your grace than we did last year? God, when we look back a year later, would we be able to see how you have grown us as people and as a body? Lord, would you give us the courage to follow you? God, we love you, and we pray this in your holy name. Amen.